If there's one thing history has proven time and time again, it's that civilization is fragile. All it takes is one catastrophic event to push society past the breaking point. An EMP attack wouldn't just cause a blackout. It would rip modern life apart at the seams, taking down power grids, communication networks, transportation, and emergency services all at once. Within hours, panic sets in. Within days, law and order begin to collapse. Most people have no plan for something like this. They assume disasters will be short-lived, that help will arrive, that everything will go back to normal. But in an EMP scenario, normal ceases to exist. With no information, no supply chains, and no functioning government response, people will turn desperate fast. The first 72 hours are the most critical. This is when you need to act while others are still in shock. If you hesitate, if you wait to see how things unfold, you'll find yourself caught in a storm of chaos, hunger, and violence with no way out. That's why today, we're breaking down exactly what you need to do to survive the first 3 days after an EMP. How to secure food and water before panic buying empties every store. How to fortify your home before looters start roaming the streets. How to disappear into the background and avoid becoming a target. This isn't theory. This is real-world survival strategy, and it could mean the difference between life and death when the grid goes down for good. In the beginning, it feels like any other power outage. You might shrug it off, hoping electricity will be back in an hour or two, but something is different this time. There's an uncanny silence out there. No streetlights humming, no mechanical whir of air conditioners, no cars cruising by with their headlights piercing the gloom. Your phone can't make a call. The internet is non-existent. And maybe the battery icon on your device is just a meaningless shape because there's nothing for it to connect to. You check your car, turning the key in the ignition, and not a single light on the dash responds. Then you look outside and see other neighbors trying to do the same thing with similar results. If you're in a high-rise building, the elevator is stuck between floors, and people are pounding the metal doors from the inside, trying to figure out why no alarm is blaring. All of these clues hammer home the same reality. Something massive has taken place, something beyond a typical power grid failure. When people begin strolling out onto the street, you can see the confusion on their faces. Some might stand there calling out to one another, wondering if they missed a storm warning or a citywide alert. Others may still be hopeful, leaning on the assumption that utility workers will show up with flashlights and trucks any moment. Yet there is this growing sense of dread as no vehicles cruise by and no emergency sirens echo across the neighborhood. That sense of dread can paralyze people because they are so accustomed to a world that is always plugged in, always feeding them information. In an EMP scenario, one of the first and biggest challenges is the total vacuum of reliable communication. You can't check Twitter, you can't make a call, you can't even confirm if help is coming. Many people get stuck in denial or freeze in place, waiting for the power to magically flip back on. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking, and every passing minute matters. You, on the other hand, are going to be different if you know what is happening. The instant it becomes clear that this is bigger than an ordinary blackout, your top priority is shifting to a readiness mindset. Instead of letting confusion slow you down, you want to move with a sense of purpose. If water is still running through the pipes, fill up every container you have because who knows when the municipal pumps will lose pressure completely. Maybe you have a storage of bottled water or a few jugs stashed away. That's good, but fill the bathtub anyway. That tub can hold a significant supply of water you might need for drinking, cooking, or basic sanitation over the next couple of days. And while you're doing that, take a moment to do a mental sweep of your home, your car, and your immediate surroundings, making sure you understand what resources you have on hand. Candles, flashlights, radios in metal containers, or in a makeshift Faraday cage. Batteries, first aid kits. Gather those quietly, because most people around you will still be wondering if the lights come back in an hour, while you're using that hour to stockpile and secure resources. Another early consideration is to avoid stepping outside to chase news or join crowds forming in the streets. Curiosity will lead many into dangerous situations where rumors spread, tempers flare, and the seeds of chaos are planted. For you, a low profile is essential from the start. Turn off unnecessary lights if you have a battery-powered lamp or a candle. Keeping your home dark at night is your first defensive measure. Not that you'll have much electrical light anyway, but even the flicker of a candle in a window can signal that someone inside might have supplies. The less attention you draw, the better. Everyone else is looking for some semblance of control, and if they see your household carrying on calmly with lights or cooking scents drifting out, guess where their eyes and suspicions will land. Remember, an EMP can trigger the worst side of human nature, especially as soon as people realize no official help is coming and no one can call 911 when desperation mounts. By about 6 or 12 hours in, a few people have recognized that something profound has happened, though many still hold out hope that the authorities have a secret plan, or that local power crews will be on the job soon enough. You'll see neighbors wandering around, checking on each other, sometimes even forming small groups to walk down to the nearest closed grocery store or gas station to see what's happening. In your home, though, you're transitioning from just collecting resources to planning how to defend them. Modern houses aren't typically constructed with siege conditions in mind, but there are steps you can take right away to discourage both opportunistic thieves and more organized mobs if things deteriorate quickly. You might find that locking the doors and windows is no longer a simple routine, but a major part of survival. Think about whether your doors have sturdy bolts, or if you need a makeshift barricade for peace of mind. An old bookshelf, a heavy dresser, anything that can slow down or impede forced entry. Curtains should remain closed after dark, and if you have something like a thick blanket or blackout curtains, use them to ensure no interior light seeps outside. As for windows themselves, if you live on a ground floor, you can consider quietly wedging furniture against them from the inside, or even placing nails or boards that would make prying them open more difficult. Anything that signals this home is not a casual grab. If, however, you have large bay windows that are highly visible, you might prefer an outward illusion of having been raided already. Some people have recommended scattered debris or even a broken window to suggest there is nothing left to steal inside. At this stage, your biggest advantage is that the majority of the population is still ignorant of how deep this crisis goes. People still believe that once the utility company gets the substation powered up, life will return to normal. Because of this, you have an opportunity to make subtle defensive moves, gather additional supplies if you can do it with minimal risk, and make your home low profile before desperation pushes your neighbors or strangers to do things they never would have considered before. Also, keep a mental inventory of what you own. Look at your pantry, your medicine cabinet, your tools, and anything you store in the garage or a backyard shed. Try to locate them all in one secure place if you can, or hide them in separate stashes around the house so that if someone does break in, they won't immediately find everything. Take stock of your personal means of defense, whether that's a firearm you legally own or improvised tools like hammers, crowbars, baseball bats, or pepper spray. If you do have a firearm, the next question is whether you have enough ammunition and if it's stored in a manner that's accessible but safe. Tension levels will rise if others get wind that you're armed, so avoid flaunting that fact or letting it slip in conversation. The best defense is not getting in a fight at all, but being prepared if one comes to you. That means setting up items like homemade noise traps, a line of empty cans, or a metal chime near windows and doors. So if someone tries to creep in at night, you have a split second of warning. Speaking of night, the second night after an EMP is when fear really sets in for a lot of people. If you can see around your block or your building, you might notice the sense of gloom is heavier, almost tangible, because people realize no official announcements have been made and no generator trucks are rolling out. That's when you might hear yelling in the distance or see flickers of light from torches or candles in the streets. Large groups sometimes begin forming around big stores or distribution centers, drawn by rumors that there might be some resource left inside, and these gatherings can become dangerously volatile. Staying indoors and keeping a watchful eye on your surroundings, perhaps in shifts if you have multiple people in your household, is crucial. Over the course of these first 24 hours, a huge advantage is your mental readiness and the steps you've taken not only to gather water and food, but also to ensure your home doesn't stand out as a target. By the time day 2 or day 3 dawns, the tipping point is reached for the masses. You'll see or hear about people smashing store windows if they haven't done so already, rummaging through empty aisles, and possibly turning on each other for scraps of food. Pharmacies become battlegrounds for those who need urgent medication or recognize that medical supplies are suddenly priceless. A powerless gas station is no good for pumping fuel, But that won't stop determined individuals from trying to siphon out what's left underground or from abandoned vehicles. And you can bet that if someone finds a working vehicle, they'll guard it aggressively or use it to exert control over less mobile groups. At this stage, the veneer of normal life is peeling away in big sheets. You can't step outside without encountering frightened people who are uncertain how they'll feed their families tomorrow. Gangs or opportunistic criminals begin to realize that police are almost non-existent as an organized force. Sure, some brave officers might still be out there trying to keep order on foot, but without radio communication or the backup of an entire precinct, their effectiveness can be very limited. That leads to power vacuums in certain neighborhoods where thugs or local bullies step in as a de facto authority, deciding who can pass and who can't. If you see any sign that such groups are rallying in your area, your best bet might be to stay completely invisible until you can move away safely or until they lose interest in your part of town. Home invasions become an increasing possibility, particularly once people realize there's nothing left in commercial areas. Desperate individuals might go door to door, searching for food, water, or anything they can trade. Many will knock politely at first, but it doesn't take much for a hungry or frightened person to transition from asking to demanding, especially if they suspect you have a well-stocked pantry. That's why the illusions you set up earlier, making your place look already ransacked, not shining bright lights at night, not cooking strong-smelling foods that waft into the street, can spare you from confrontation. If you have to cook, maybe you do it during the hours when everyone else is rummaging around or busy with their own problems, or you limit it to small, discreet cooking methods that don't create large amounts of smoke or odor. All the while, you're keeping track of your inventory, aware of how much you have left for yourself or any loved ones with you. You're rationing carefully, using water only for the essentials, and maybe you've set aside a quiet corner in your home or apartment where you can perform rudimentary hygiene. Cleanliness might seem like a luxury in this scenario, but diseases can spread quickly when sanitation systems fail. If you need to relieve yourself and your toilet no longer flushes, you better have a plan for that. A lined bucket, a trench dug out back, or some approach that won't poison your immediate environment and create health hazards. In this environment, confrontation can spark in a heartbeat. It might be triggered by rumor, misinformation, or even a simple disagreement over who deserves the last can of food in an abandoned store. Because communication lines are down, misinformation is rampant. People might think the government is staging the crisis, or that soldiers are about to storm through, or that some neighborhood is hoarding a giant cache of supplies in a church basement, none of which might be true. But hysteria can inflame tensions all the same. This is why you must avoid crowds as much as possible and stay alert to any shifts in the local power dynamics. If new faces arrive in your area, or if you notice large groups heading in your direction, that's your cue to hunker down or plan an exit route if you feel overwhelmed. By day 3, it becomes clear that no easy fix is coming. The electric grid in a massive region might have been knocked out, and specialized equipment needed to restore it could be impossible to produce or transport in a grid-down scenario. People can see the big picture now, even if they don't fully understand the science behind the EMP. What they do see is that the tap has run dry, store shelves are empty, the nights are pitch black, and there's no official presence keeping order. It's more than a mere crisis, it's the unraveling of the social fabric. In cities, the pressure is the greatest. Populations depend heavily on just-in-time delivery systems that require electricity, vehicles, and working logistics. When that fails, large swaths of urban neighborhoods are left with minimal supplies, little drinkable water, and an immediate surge of civil unrest. Some might try to flee, walking on highways littered with abandoned cars, heading toward the suburbs or rural areas in hopes of finding relief. But the highways themselves can become precarious places where bandits or desperate gangs roam, picking off isolated travelers. Others remain in the city, banding together in small enclaves, neighbors looking out for each other, forming watch rotations or pooling resources to cook communal meals. That's sometimes the best-case scenario, a network of well-intentioned survivors who realize that cooperation is the only way to ride out the worst of the crisis. Still, not everyone is so cooperative. Gangs or criminal groups may have the advantage in weaponry and manpower, organizing raids on apartment blocks or forcibly taking control of any known resource caches, such as a discovered warehouse or an overlooked distribution center. This can turn entire districts into no-go zones for outsiders, or even for local residents who refuse to pay tribute or comply with the gang's demands. If you live near one of these zones, you might hear gunfire at night or see the glow of distant fires. The environment is reminiscent of a war-torn region, all triggered by the absence of the critical infrastructure we once took for granted. For those living in more rural or suburban areas, the collapse can take a different shape, though it's no less dangerous. There may be fewer people competing for the same resources, but there are also fewer resources to begin with, especially if you can't access a decent water source or rely on a farm or garden that can sustain you. Nevertheless, a rural community with a few solar panels, a functional well, or a network of neighbors who farm might do better than people jam-packed in downtown high-rises without working elevators or any running water. If you manage to remain safe and secure through these first 4 or 5 days, you're likely in a better position than most. You've figured out a system for gathering or purifying water, you've rationed your food carefully, and you've done your best to conceal those preparations from the wandering eyes of the hungry. You've avoided or mitigated personal confrontations by staying low profile, while also defending your household if absolutely necessary. At this point, you may start thinking about how you'll fare in a prolonged emergency, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month or more. The stability of society during that extended period depends on whether any form of large-scale relief arrives. Without that, society continues to fracture, either descending into scattered enclaves or pockets of local governance, or possibly even returning to a kind of feudal dynamic where warlords or big personalities with muscle call the shots. Yet, even in the darkest times, some communities will band together to form safe havens. They'll share knowledge. Someone might know first aid, another might know how to filter water from a nearby stream, and someone else might be an excellent gardener or mechanic who can repair a few key tools. These pockets of resilience can become critical lifelines. If you link up with people who can trade essential goods or watch each other's backs, the next phase of survival might not be so grim. But it all depends on the foundation you set in those first 72 hours, before the rest of the population has realized the full scope of the catastrophe. That window is your golden opportunity to gather, fortify, and stay mentally one step ahead, so that when the violence and chaos reach their peak, you're not caught empty-handed and vulnerable. You've now caught a glimpse of how quickly the world can unravel in the wake of an EMP attack, especially during those first 3 days when shock turns to panic. Panic turns to violence, and violence can morph into the collapse of social order. The practical steps we've discussed, securing water while it's still flowing, rationing your food supplies, fortifying your home and maintaining a low profile, preparing to defend yourself if there's no other choice, and understanding that once stores are empty, homes become the new target, are all crucial to navigating that critical window where society tears at the seams. Having this awareness means you're less likely to freeze up in disbelief or make the mistake of advertising your resources to neighbors who may become desperate. Instead, you'll act quickly, barricade what needs barricading, lay low during the riots, and keep a watchful eye on your family or your inner circle. From there, it's a matter of endurance, cooperation with those you trust, and a strong sense of situational awareness. If you can make it through the first 72 hours without getting tangled in chaos, your odds of persevering beyond that grow dramatically, because you'll be making decisions from a position of relative strength and foresight, not from the same raw panic that grips everyone else. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this deep dive into surviving the first 72 hours after an EMP. If the insights shared here motivated you or sparked some ideas, then please do consider subscribing to the channel or sharing this video with those who might benefit. Whether you're just dipping your toe into preparedness or you've been building a plan for years, the key takeaway is that it's never too early to think ahead, but it can quickly become too late. When those lights blink out and you hear that deafening silence, the time for building a plan has already passed. So let's prepare in advance, stay vigilant, and look out for each other, because even if society crumbles, humanity can still shine through how we respond. Until next time, stay safe, stay ready, and remember that awareness and adaptability are your greatest assets when the stakes are high.